The throne room fell silent when the child spoke, not the manufactured silence of ceremony, but the sudden absence of breath that comes when the universe shifts beneath your feet. Queen Vashira's triple-jointed fingers froze mid-gesture, her speech to the diplomatic assembly dying in her throat. She had ruled the Kale Imperium for 43 cycles. She had stared down warlords and watched suns collapse. Nothing had ever stopped her words before. The human delegation stood in the antechamber, waiting for formal presentation, standard procedure. The child had wandered ahead, perhaps 7 solar years old by human measure, small and fragile as all their young were. It should not have been possible. Vashira's royal guard, the Crimson Silence, never failed. Yet this tiny creature had slipped through barriers that had held back assassins and zealots. The child looked up at Vashira with eyes the color of Earth's sky. No fear registered on that smooth alien face, just curiosity. The sort that had driven humanity across the stars, despite lacking the biological advantages every other species possessed.
They had no scales, no armor.
No venom or claws. They simply refused to stop moving forward. When the child spoke, the words carried across the vast chamber with perfect clarity. Not loud, but somehow absolute. Every translator chip in the room seized on them, broadcast them, made them impossible to ignore. The child said 3 words. A name. A human name that should have meant nothing to anyone present. Except it wasn't nothing. Vashira's genetic memory, passed down through the royal bloodline for 10,000 years, surged forward like ice water in her veins. The prophecy had been dismissed as mythology. Ancient warnings etched in the dead language of the first Kale, locked in vaults beneath the palace where only queens could walk. Vashira had read those warnings during her coronation trials. She had studied every symbol, every dire prediction about the species that would rise from a distant yellow star. She had thought them metaphorical, poetic expressions of general xenophobia from an era before the Imperium learned to share the cosmos. She had been catastrophically wrong. The name the child spoke matched the first name in the prophecy, letter for letter, sound for sound. Impossible. The prophecy had been carved into stone when humanity still crawled in caves, when Earth was nothing but radio silence and primitive chemistry. The Kale had mapped that world from a distance, noted it as pre-space flight, filed it away as irrelevant for another 1,000,000 years of evolution. Somehow the first Kale had known. They had known what humanity would call their champions. They had known what those champions would do. Vashira's secondary heart began to pound. The sensation was alien to her, this biological response to genuine terror. Her guard commander, Telrath, shifted microscopically. He had noticed her reaction. His compound eyes, capable of seeing 17 different light spectrums, focused entirely on his queen.
Waiting for orders.
The child seemed unaware of the chaos erupting in the throne room. The human delegation was pushing forward now, panic evident in their jerky movements. They were calling for the child. Apologies tumbled from the lead ambassador's mouth. Something about a curious daughter, about protocols not properly explained, about no disrespect intended. Vashira barely heard them. The prophecy's second passage flooded her consciousness. After the first name comes the choice. Respond with fear, and the children of Earth will become your ending. Respond with wisdom, and they will become your salvation. But wisdom requires trust, and trust requires the impossible. She had always wondered what the impossible meant in that context. Now she understood. The child was looking at her with expectation. Not the calculating assessment of a spy or the glazed reverence of a believer. Just a child wanting acknowledgement, wanting to be seen. Every instinct Vashira possessed screamed danger. This was a threat beyond military calculation. This was the collision of past and future, prophecy and reality, in the body of something small and breakable and somehow terrible. The royal court waited. 300 beings from 40 different species, all watching to see how the Queen of the Kale Imperium would handle this breach of protocol. Some probably hoped she would respond with traditional severity. Others knew her reputation for measured judgment. None of them knew about the prophecy. That knowledge was hers alone, passed from queen to queen in the darkness beneath the throne. Vashira made her decision. She rose from her throne, all 7 feet of her unfolding in a smooth motion that silenced even the frantic ambassadors. The guard commander tensed. Rising during a formal audience broke her own protocol. She had never done it before. She descended the 7 steps that separated her throne from the common floor. Each step represented a conquest, a world brought into the Imperium. Each step was supposed to remind visitors that she stood above them in all ways. She knelt before the child. The throne room erupted. Voices crashed against the vaulted ceiling. Talrath's hand moved toward his weapon, instinct overriding training for a fraction of a second before iron discipline reasserted itself. The human delegation froze in horror, probably imagining their diplomatic mission ending in execution and war. Bashira extended one scaled hand. The child, without hesitation, placed a small, soft palm against it. The child's skin was impossibly warm. Humanity's baseline temperature ran hotter than any species Bashira had encountered, their metabolisms burning like small stars. The child's hand barely covered a third of her palm. The throne room remained in chaos, but it seemed distant now, irrelevant. Bashira focused on the child's face. Those blue eyes held something she couldn't name. Not wisdom exactly. Humans this young rarely possessed that. But there was an openness, a complete absence of the hierarchical fear that defined most species young. Human children looked at the universe like it owed them answers, not punishment. The prophecy's third passage rose in her mind unbidden. They come from a world that tried to kill them every day. They learned to make family from strangers, to find hope in ashes, to laugh while standing on the edge of extinction. This is their power. This is their danger. They do not understand surrender because their world never offered them that option. Bashira had read those words as poetic exaggeration. Earth was a garden world, lush and temperate. But she had studied human history since their arrival in galactic space. She had learned what garden world meant in their context. Gravity that would cripple a kale, bacteria that evolved specifically to consume them, weather systems that could flatten cities, predators that had shaped them into persistence hunters, a sun that burned their skin. They had evolved on a planet that was actively hostile, and they had thrived. They had looked at a world designed to destroy them and decided to love it anyway. The child spoke again, and this time Bashira understood the context. The name belonged to someone in the delegation. The child was simply pointing out her father, trying to be helpful in the way children did. No prophecy, no doom. Just a daughter who wanted her parent, except the prophecy had never been about doom. Bashira realized that now, with the child's hand still warm against her palm. The first Kale hadn't been warning about human weapons or their expansion. They had been warning about something far more dangerous, human nature itself. The ability to look at a queen on a throne and see just another person. The tendency to offer trust before threat. The sheer, insane courage of their curiosity. This child had slipped past the crimson silence, not through stealth or malice, but because she had seen an interesting door and wanted to know what was behind it. She had walked into the throne room of the most powerful military empire in 3 galaxies because she was bored waiting in the antechamber. She had spoken her father's name because she thought Bashira might want to know. That was the warning. Humanity did not respect barriers they found unreasonable. They did not fear authority they found unjust. They looked at the universe's rules and asked why, with genuine expectation of an answer. Bashira had built her reign on protocol, on the careful maintenance of distance between ruler and ruled, on the understanding that power required separation, that authority demanded elevation. Humanity was going to destroy all of that simply by refusing to believe it was necessary. The prophecy's 4th passage completed itself in her thoughts. You cannot control them. You cannot contain them. You cannot predict them. You can only choose whether they will tear down your walls as enemies or as friends. Either way, the walls are coming down. The child was starting to look uncertain now. Bashira realized she had been silent too long. In human terms, this was probably becoming awkward. The concept of awkwardness having any place in a throne room was itself revolutionary. Talrath had regained his composure, though Bashira could read tension in the set of his primary shoulders. He knew something significant was happening. He just didn't know what. The guard commander had served 3 queens. He had seen wars and peace treaties and assassination attempts. He had never seen a queen kneel. Bashira spoke carefully, her vocal structure adapting to produce sounds compatible with human hearing. She had learned their primary language, though she had never used it before. It had seemed beneath her station to speak in the tongue of newcomers. Now it felt essential. She said the child's name. She had heard the human delegation use it while calling after their wandering daughter. It tasted strange in her mouth. The syllables too soft, too rounded. Human names lacked the clicking harmonics of proper Kale designation. But she said it clearly, with the full respect she would grant a visiting dignitary. The child's face transformed. A smile, that peculiar human expression that showed teeth without threat. It was supposed to be disturbing. Bashira had studied the xenopsychology reports. Most species found the human practice of baring teeth as a happiness signal deeply unsettling. Instead, she found it oddly affecting. There was something genuine in it, something that bypassed rational analysis and spoke directly to social instincts. The child responded with a cascade of words, too fast for Vashira's translator to keep pace. Something about the throne being pretty, and did she get to wear the crown all the time, and her feet must hurt from standing up there. The innocent observations of someone too young to understand ceremony, too young to pretend. Vashira stood, bringing the child's hand up with her. She looked toward the human delegation. They had gone very still. The lead ambassador, a woman with silver threading through dark hair, stared at Vashira with an expression that might have been terror or hope or both. Vashira recognized her from the briefing files. Ambassador Chen, representing Earth's United Colonial Authority. 40 years of diplomatic service, architect of 3 major peace accords. By all accounts, brilliant and ruthlessly pragmatic. Right now, she looked like a parent watching her daughter walk along the cliff edge. Vashira kept her voice gentle but carried it across the throne room with the resonance that was her birthright. She addressed Ambassador Chen directly, still in human language. The choice itself was a statement. Queens of the Kale did not accommodate others linguistically. Others accommodated them. She said she believed this young one belonged to their delegation. She had a talent for navigation. Perhaps she would become a star chart mapper someday. Or an explorer. The throne room had gone absolutely silent. Vashira could feel the collective shock like a physical pressure. She had just complimented a security breach. She had spoken in the offender's language. And she was still holding the child's hand. Ambassador Chen moved forward carefully, her movements precise with controlled panic. She began to speak, probably to apologize again, to promise disciplinary measures, to do whatever damage control she could manage. Vashira stopped her with a gesture. She told the ambassador that curiosity was no crime in her court. Perhaps it should have been considered before, but traditions could be examined, questioned, even changed, if there was wisdom in the questioning. The child was looking between Vashira and her mother now, clearly sensing the tension even if she didn't fully understand it. Vashira released her hand gently, then did something that would be discussed in political theory classes for the next century. She removed one of her ceremonial rings. The band was forged from star metal, inscribed with her personal seal. It was too large for the child's finger, but Vashira placed it in her small palm anyway. She told the child to keep it safe. And when she was older, when she perhaps became that explorer or star chart mapper, she should come back to this throne room. The doors would be open. No guards would stop her. She would always be welcome. The child examined the ring with the serious concentration children brought to gifts. She said thank you with careful formality, probably mimicking something her parents had taught her about meeting important people. Then she added that Vashira's scales were beautiful, and did they change color like the pictures she'd seen of Earth's chameleons. Vashira found herself making a sound she had never made in public before. It was the Kale equivalent of laughter, a clicking rhythm from her secondary throat. Several court members took involuntary steps backward. Queen Vashira did not laugh. It was not done. It was not even possible, according to some. She explained that her scales did not change color, but that was an excellent question. She should ask her scientists about the biological mechanisms involved. Perhaps there would be interesting comparisons. The child nodded seriously as if Vashira had just given her a critical mission. Ambassador Chen had tears tracking down her face. Humans did that, Vashira had learned. Leaked salt water from their eyes when emotions overwhelmed them? It was considered a vulnerability by most species. Vashira was beginning to understand it was actually a pressure release valve. Humans felt everything at intensity levels that would incapacitate other species. The tears were how they survived their own emotions. Chen reached her daughter finally, placing hands on small shoulders. The relief was palpable. She started to guide the child away, probably wanting to exit before the situation could deteriorate further. Vashira spoke again, this time in formal Kale. The translator chips would catch it, broadcast it to the assembly. She declared that the human delegation's formal presentation would proceed as planned. No breach had occurred. A future explorer had simply arrived ahead of schedule. This was to be noted in the official record. Telrath's voice came from behind her, pitched for her hearing only. He asked if she was certain of his course. His tone carried no judgment, only genuine question. The guard commander's loyalty was absolute, but his duty included questioning decisions that might endanger her. Vashira turned to face him fully. She told him she had never been more certain of anything. Then she added something that made his scales ripple with shock. She said the Crimson Silence would begin training exercises with human security forces. They would learn from each other. Understanding would flow both ways. Telrath's eyes did something complicated, but he bowed, perfect and precise. He said as his queen commanded. The throne room erupted again, but this time the chaos was different. Before it had been shock, now it was possibility. Conversation crashed against conversation. Some voices carried anger, but others held curiosity. Change was coming. Not the violent upheaval the prophecy might have implied, but something perhaps more radical. Evolution by choice rather than conquest. Bashira returned to her throne. The 7 steps felt different climbing up. Each one was still a conquered world, but now, she wondered, had those worlds been conquered, or had they simply been given no other option? The distinction suddenly seemed important. The human delegation was being ushered to their formal presentation position. Ambassador Chen still held her daughter's hand tightly. The child was examining the ring, turning it to catch the light from the chamber's fusion lamps. Vashira settled into her throne and prepared to receive the delegation properly. But something had shifted fundamentally. The throne no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a chair. An important chair, certainly. One that carried responsibility and history. But just a chair. Occupancy did not make her more than the being standing below. It made her responsible to them. Different. Not better. The prophecy's final passage whispered through her consciousness. They will teach you that power is not distance. They will show you that authority is not elevation. They will prove that respect is not fear. And if you are wise enough to learn, they will stand beside you when the darkness comes. Because darkness always comes, and humans always fight it. Even when fighting is impossible. Especially then, Vashira began the formal reception. Her words followed ancient protocol, welcoming the human delegation to the Kale Imperium. But she adjusted the phrasing slightly, adding nuances that had never been there before. She spoke of partnership rather than accommodation, of mutual respect rather than granted tolerance. The changes were subtle. Most of the court probably didn't notice them, but Ambassador Chen noticed. The woman's expression shifted from carefully controlled diplomacy to something more genuine. Hope, perhaps. Or recognition that something impossible was happening. The delegation's presentation proceeded smoothly. They offered technological exchanges, cultural programs, trade agreements, all standard diplomatic offerings. But Vashira listened differently now. She heard the subtext. Humanity was offering friendship to a species that had never needed friends before. The Kale Imperium had subjects, allies of convenience, and enemies. They had never had friends. The concept seemed foreign to the very structure of their civilization. Humans had arrived in galactic space only 60 standard years ago. They had spread like wildfire, establishing colonies on worlds most species considered uninhabitable. They didn't have the fastest ships or the strongest weapons. They had something else. They had the ability to look at a hostile environment and see home, to look at alien species and see potential companions, to look at the universe's cruelty and respond with stubborn optimism. It was insane. It was beautiful. It was going to change everything. Vashira found herself studying the delegation members more carefully. They were diverse even by human standards. Different skin tones, different features, different builds. Humanity had spent most of their history divided, she knew. They had warred with each other over differences so minor that other species couldn't detect them without genetic analysis. Yet they had somehow learned to unify without erasing those differences. They had figured out how to be one people and many people simultaneously. The Kale had achieved unity through conquest and cultural homogenization. The strong absorbed the weak. Diversity was eliminated in favor of imperial cohesion. It had worked for 10,000 years. Vashira was beginning to suspect it had also been slowly killing them. A species that could not adapt was a species waiting for the universe to present an unsurvivable challenge. Stagnation felt like stability until it became extinction. When the formal presentations concluded, Vashira did something unprecedented again. She invited Ambassador Chen to walk with her in the throne room's peripheral gallery, alone, without the delegation, without the full court. Just 2 leaders speaking directly. The court reacted predictably. Voices rose in protest. This was not done. Private audiences required weeks of scheduling. Security protocols demanded witness and documentation. Vashira silenced them with a gesture. She informed her court that she was the queen of the Kale Imperium. She would decide what was done and what was not. If they had concerns, they could submit them through proper channels after the meeting. The steel in her voice reminded everyone why she wore the crown. Telrath moved to follow her, duty overriding the dismissal. Vashira stopped him with a look. She told him she would be safe. If she could not trust a human ambassador for the duration of a private conversation, then the universe had already become too dangerous to navigate. He hesitated, which was itself remarkable. Then he bowed and took position at the gallery entrance. close enough to respond to threat, far enough to grant privacy. The compromise satisfied his duty without undermining her command. Ambassador Chen walked beside Vashira, her daughter now with the rest of the delegation. The woman moved carefully, clearly aware that she was in a historical moment, that whatever happened in the next few minutes would ripple outward for decades. Vashira led her to a section of the gallery where the walls showed the stars. Not windows, but quantum-linked displays showing real-time views of Kale territories. Thousands of systems, millions of worlds, all bound together by the empire her ancestors had built. She asked Chen what she saw when she looked at those stars.
The ambassador studied the display for a long moment. She said she saw homes.
Billions of beings living their lives, raising children, building futures. She saw complexity beyond human comprehension. And she saw beauty. Vashira absorbed this. She told Chen what she saw. Responsibility. Wait. The endless pressure of maintaining order across an empire too vast to truly govern. She saw the fear that any mistake would cascade into catastrophe, that she would be the queen who let the Imperium fall. Chen's response was quiet. She said that sounded lonely. The word struck Vashira like a physical blow. Lonely. She had never applied that term to her existence. Queens were not lonely. They were elevated, respected, powerful. Loneliness was for lesser beings who needed connection to survive. Except she was lonely. She had been lonely for 43 cycles. She had stood on her throne above everyone else, and she had been absolutely alone. Chen continued. She said humanity had learned, painfully, that no one was strong enough to carry everything alone. That trying to do so was not strength, but rather the fastest path to breaking. They had learned to ask for help, to share burdens, to trust others with their vulnerabilities. It had saved them countless times. Vashira asked if that wasn't weakness. Chen smiled, but it was sad. She said they had thought so too for a long time. Their history was full of leaders who had destroyed themselves and everyone around them because they believed strength meant isolation. They had been wrong. Strength was having the courage to reach out. The gallery was quiet except for the soft hum of the environmental systems. Vashira made a decision. She told Chen about the prophecy. Not all of it. Some secrets were still too dangerous to share. But she told her about the warnings, about the predictions that humanity would rise to challenge the established order, about the choice the first Kale had seen coming across 10,000 years. Chen listened without interrupting. When Vashira finished, the ambassador was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that recontextualized everything. She said humanity had their own prophecies, not mystical visions, but statistical models, xenosociological projections. They had known that first contact would be dangerous. They had known that older, established species would view them as threats. They had prepared for war. Instead, they had chosen to arrive as friends. Not because they were naive, but because they had decided that even if the universe responded with violence, they would not be the ones who threw the first punch. The weight of that statement settled between them. Two species both aware that their meeting could mean conflict, both choosing differently than history suggested. Vashira asked why. Why risk so much on the hope of friendship? Chen's expression became distant. She said humans had nearly destroyed themselves before reaching the stars, multiple times. Nuclear weapons, ecological collapse, artificial intelligence run amok. They had looked at their own extinction more than once. They had learned that survival meant more than just having bigger weapons. It meant having reasons to survive. It meant building something worth preserving. Vashira understood suddenly. Humanity had come so close to extinction that they had learned to value existence itself, not just their own existence, but the existence of others. They had learned that diversity was survival, that different perspectives were not threats but resources, that the universe was kinder when you treated it with kindness. It was a lesson the Kale had never needed to learn, because they had always been strong. They had conquered their world, then their system, then their galaxy. They had never faced true existential threat. They had never had to ask for help, because they had never needed it. Until now. Vashira didn't know what the next crisis would be. The universe was vast and full of dangers that even the Kale Imperium couldn't predict. But she knew with certainty that when it came, the old ways wouldn't be enough. Authority through fear would fail. Through isolation would fail. She needed what humanity offered. Not their weapons or their technology, their perspective. Their insane, beautiful, impossible belief that connection was strength. Chen was watching her carefully. The ambassador had probably seen something in Vashira's expression. Humans were good at reading faces, even alien ones. They had evolved for social complexity, for pack cooperation. They saw emotions where other species saw only anatomy. Vashira asked what humanity would want in exchange for an alliance. True alliance, not the diplomatic surface relationship they had now. Partnership. Friendship. The word felt strange even thinking it. Chen's answer was immediate. Nothing. Bashir's scales shifted, an involuntary reaction to shock. Nothing was not how galactic politics worked. Everything had a price. Everything required exchange. Chen clarified. She said humanity didn't believe in transactional friendship. If the Kale wanted partnership, it was freely offered, but partnership meant mutual respect, mutual vulnerability, mutual support. It meant the Kale would need to change, not become human, but become something new. The empire that learned to listen. Vashira considered this. Change was terrifying. The empire had stood unchanged for 10,000 years. That stability was its strength, but stability could also be stagnation, and stagnation was death. She told Chen she would need time, that changing an empire was not something done in a single conversation, but she was willing to try. The alternative was to watch humanity spread through the galaxy without her people, leaving the Kale behind as a relic of an older, simpler time. Chen nodded. She said time was acceptable, but she added that Vashira's daughter, the one who had wandered into the throne room, was asking questions. Children always did, and children deserved honest answers, even when the truth was complicated. Vashira realized Chen was offering her a template. Start with the next generation. Let them grow up knowing humans as partners rather than strangers. Let them learn that different was not dangerous. The cultural shift would happen naturally over time. It was brilliant. It was patient. It was very human. They walked back to the throne room entrance together. Telrath stood at perfect attention, though his eyes tracked every micro-movement. The guard commander would want a detailed briefing. He would probably be horrified by half of what Vashira had decided. But he would follow orders. That was what made him valuable. The throne room had settled into nervous quiet. Everyone waited to see what came next. Vashira returned to her throne, but the 7 steps felt different now. Not a climb to power, but a climb to responsibility. She looked at her court, at the assembled representatives of 40 species, and saw them differently. Not subjects, but people. Complicated, flawed, trying their best. Just like her. She made her final pronouncement of the day. The Kale Imperium would enter formal alliance with humanity. Full cultural exchange, military cooperation, scientific partnership. The details would be negotiated over the coming cycles, but the intent was established. They were no longer strangers sharing space. They were allies sharing future. The court erupted again, but Vashira had expected that. Change was never quiet. Some voices carried celebration, others fury, most confusion. That was acceptable. They would adapt, or they would retire. The empire would continue, but it would evolve. Ambassador Chen was being congratulated by her delegation. Her daughter had reclaimed her hand and was talking animatedly, probably describing every detail of her adventure in the throne room. The child still wore Vashira's ring on a chain around her neck now, too large to fit properly. That ring would become a historical artifact someday. Museums would fight over it. Historians would analyze its significance. But right now, it was just a gift from one person to another, a promise that doors would stay open. Telrath approached the throne, his movements careful. He asked permission to speak freely. Vashira granted it. He told her that she had changed the empire more in a single day than most queens managed in lifetimes. He did not sound entirely pleased about it. Vashira asked if he thought she had made a mistake. Telrath was quiet. Then he said he thought she had made a choice. Time would determine if it was a mistake. But he would stand beside her either way. That was his duty. Vashira felt something crack inside her. Not breaking, but opening. She told Telrath he was more than a guard. He was a friend. If he wanted to be... The words felt foreign on her tongue. Queens did not have friends. They had subjects and servants and advisors. Friends implied equality, implied vulnerability. Telrath's scales did their complicated color shift. He said he would be honored. Vashira descended from her throne. She walked through her court, not to leave, but to be among them. She spoke with representatives, asked questions, listened to concerns. She did not have answers for everything, but she did not pretend to either. She was learning. The day stretched long. Eventually, the formal audiences concluded. The throne room emptied slowly. Vashira remained, standing before the star display, Telrath stood nearby, close enough for conversation. She told him about the prophecy. He deserved to know. He listened without interruption, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, Telrath spoke. He said the first Kale must have been terrified, to see so far into the future and know they could not change it, to leave only warnings hoping future generations would understand. Vashira hadn't considered it that way. She had thought of the prophecy as a gift, as guidance, but Telrath was right. It had been written by people who saw disaster coming and could do nothing but watch. The first Kale had known that humanity would rise. They had known that the Imperium would face a choice, and they had known that by the time the choice arrived, they would be dust. Telrath asked what the prophecy said about the darkness. Vashira hesitated. That part was more disturbing than the rest. The final passages spoke of something coming, something that would threaten all species. Not immediately, not even within the next few generations, but eventually. The first Kale had been frustratingly vague about specifics. They wrote only that when the darkness came, survival would require unity, that the species who stood together would endure, and those who stood alone would fall, that humanity would be crucial to that survival. Telrath considered this. He said humanity was good at fighting darkness. They had practice. Vashira found herself making that clicking laugh again. It was becoming easier, less alien to her own nature. She told Telrath he was probably right. Humans fought impossible battles as a matter of cultural identity. When faced with extinction, they responded with defiance. When confronted with horror, they responded with hope. It was completely irrational. It was also completely effective. Telrath asked what came next. Immediate next, not prophecy next. Vashira said they would start small. Cultural exchanges, as promised. Military cooperation exercises. Scientific partnerships. They would let the Kale people see humans as individuals rather than as an abstract species. Fear grew in darkness. Familiarity would bring light. She would also need to speak with the Council of Queens, the ruling body that governed the greater Imperium beyond her direct system. They would be resistant. Some would be furious. She was changing policy that had stood since before most of them were born. But she had made her choice. Telrath said he would increase security. The council meetings would be dangerous, politically if not physically. Some queens would see this as weakness to exploit. Others would see opportunity for expansion. The careful balance that kept the Imperium stable would shift. Vashira accepted this. She told Telrath to trust her judgment but prepare for all outcomes. She was not naive. Change would bring conflict. But the alternative was stagnation, and stagnation was a slower death than violence. The throne room's lights dimmed automatically, responding to the cycle's end. Vashira remained standing in the semi-darkness, looking at the stars. Telrath waited patiently. He had learned long ago that she sometimes needed silence to think. Finally, Vashira spoke. She said she hoped she was right, that she hoped the prophecy meant what she thought it meant, that she hoped humanity was what they seemed to be, because if she was wrong, she had just opened the heart of the Imperium to a species that could destroy them from within. Telrath's response was simple. He said if she was wrong, they would face it together.
That was what the Kale did.
Vashira nodded. She turned from the stars and walked toward the private corridors that led to her chambers. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tonight, she would rest. But sleep came slowly. She lay in darkness, her mind racing through implications and possibilities. She thought about Ambassador Chen, about the quiet strength in the woman's voice, about the child who had wandered into her throne room because curiosity mattered more than fear. She thought about her empire, vast and powerful and terrifyingly fragile. She thought about the guards who stood at every door, the protocols that governed every interaction, the careful distance that separated her from everyone else. She wondered how much of that was necessary and how much was just habit. She wondered if it was possible to be powerful without being alone. Humans seemed to think so. They built their societies on connection. Their leaders stood among their people, not above them. Their strength came from cooperation, not domination. It was completely backwards from everything the Kale had learned. It was also working extraordinarily well for humanity. They had gone from cave dwellers to galactic explorers in the span of time it took most species to develop basic agriculture. They had survived disasters that should have ended them. They had looked at the universe's cruelty and decided to be kind anyway. Vashira had thought the prophecy was warning her about human danger, their weapons, their expansion, their potential threat to Kale supremacy. But the real danger was simpler and more profound. Humans would show the Kale everything they could have been. everything they had lost by choosing power over connection. And once you saw that difference, you could never unsee it. Sleep finally came, and with it dreams. Demon of the first Kale, standing in ancient halls, carving warnings into stone, she dreamed they were not afraid. They were hopeful. They had seen what the Kale would become, and they had left a map back to what they should have been. The prophecy was not a warning of doom. It was a message of salvation. And the key to that salvation had walked into her throne room in the form of a curious child who did not understand fear. When Vashira woke, light was streaming through her chamber's quantum windows. Outside, the Empire's homeworld turned beneath the yellow sun. Thousands of years of history, carved into every building, written into every tradition. But history was not destiny. She dressed in ceremonial armor, each piece representing a different aspect of her role. Normally, she saw them as symbols of power. Today, they felt like tools. Instruments to be used in service of something larger than herself. She returned to the throne room. Telrath was already there, having never left. His dedication was absolute. She told him to go rest. He needed sleep. He refused politely. His duty was to her safety, and that duty did not sleep. Vashira did not argue. She understood dedication. She sat on her throne and began the day's work. Reports scrolled across holographic displays. Requests for judgment, updates on colonial development, military assessments, economic projections, the endless machinery of empire, requiring constant attention. But she also drafted a message to the Council of Queens, formal notification of her alliance with humanity, explanation of her reasoning, request for support, though she did not strictly need it. She had authority over her systems, but unity was better than isolation. Some would respond with fury, others with cautious interest. A few might even respond with relief. She was not the only queen who felt the weight of eternal tradition. As she worked, she noticed something different. The throne room felt larger somehow. Not physically, but conceptually, like a door had opened, letting in air from a wider world. Her staff moved through their duties efficiently, but there was something new in their manner. Not fear or calculation, but curiosity. They had seen their queen kneel before a human child. They had seen her speak in a foreign language. They had seen her treat an intruder with respect rather than punishment. The foundations of their understanding had shifted. That would ripple outward. Staff would talk to families. Families would talk to communities. Communities would talk to worlds. The story would change with each telling, becoming myth and metaphor. But the core truth would remain. The Queen of the Kale had chosen connection over isolation. Ambassador Chen had sent a formal message, received in the morning reports. A simple thank you for Vashira's hospitality and willingness to pursue meaningful alliance. Nothing remarkable in the diplomatic language. But attached was a personal note. The note was from the child. Carefully written, probably with significant adult assistance. It thanked Vashira for the ring and for being nice. It said Vashira seemed lonely and maybe she would like to be friends. It said friends were important. They made everything better. Vashira read the note 3 times. Each time something in her chest felt tight. Humans would call it emotion. The Kale had different terms for the sensations, more clinical and detached, but the feeling was the same. She was being offered exactly what she needed most and had never known how to ask for. She composed a reply, formal acceptance to Ambassador Chen, outlining next steps for alliance implementation. But she also wrote to the child in simple language. She thanked her for the friendship offer and said yes. She said friends were indeed important, and she apologized if she had seemed lonely. She was learning that she didn't have to be. She sent both messages and returned to the day's work, but something had fundamentally changed in how she approached decisions. Each judgment was still careful, still considered, but she found herself asking new questions. Not just what is lawful, but what is kind. Not just what is traditional, but what is wise. Not just what serves the empire, but what serves the people within it. Telrath noticed. He said nothing, but his posture had relaxed microscopically. The guard commander approved, or at least accepted. That mattered more than Vashira would have expected. By midday, responses had begun arriving from the Council of Queens. Most were exactly what she anticipated. Shock, anger, demands for explanation, threats of censure. A few were more measured, requesting additional information before judgment. And one, from Queen Cheryl of the Outer Territories, was unexpected. Cheryl had written that she had been waiting 40 years for someone to have the courage to change course. That the Imperium had been dying slowly, suffocated by its own traditions. that if Vashira needed allies in this transformation, she had at least one. Vashira studied that message carefully. Cheryl was old, even by Kale standards. She had ruled her territories for over a century. If someone with that much experience believed change was necessary, perhaps Vashira was not as alone as she feared. The day progressed. Vashira worked through the endless demands of empire, but her mind kept returning to the prophecy, to the warnings about darkness yet to come. She did not know what that meant. The first Cal had been frustratingly vague, possibly because they themselves did not fully understand what they were seeing. Visions of the future were always incomplete. But she believed the core message: unity would be required. Species working together, sharing resources and knowledge and perspectives, the isolation that had kept the Imperium strong for 10,000 years would become its greatest weakness. Humanity had arrived at exactly the right moment. Or perhaps the prophecy was not prediction but causation. Perhaps the first Kale had left their warning specifically to ensure someone would recognize humanity's significance. Perhaps they had been engineering this moment across the millennia. Vashira would never know. The first Kale were long dead, their civilization buried under geological time. Only their warnings remained, carved in stone beneath her throne. But their gift was clear. They had given her permission to change. By evening, Vashira was exhausted. The emotional weight of the day pressed against her more heavily than any physical labor. She dismissed her staff and sat alone in the throne room as lights dimmed for the night cycle. Telrath remained, a silent presence at the room's edge. She asked him what he thought their empire would look like in 100 years. The question surprised him. She could tell by the way his scales shifted color. But he considered it seriously. He said if she succeeded, the empire would be unrecognizable. Multiple species sharing power, cultures blending and evolving, humanity's influence spreading through Kale traditions. It would be chaos compared to the order they knew. Vashira asked if that frightened him. Telrath was quiet for a long moment. Then he said change always frightened him. His entire purpose was protecting stability. But he also said he trusted her judgment, that if she believed this was necessary, he would follow. That was what loyalty meant, choosing to trust even when the path was unclear. Vashira felt that tightness in her chest again. She had Telrath's loyalty through duty, but she was starting to understand that she also had his respect through choice. That was different. That was more valuable. She told him to rest. Tomorrow would begin implementation of the alliance. There would be resistance, both internal and external. They would need to be ready. Telrath bowed and departed. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Vashira was truly alone in the throne room. No guards. No advisors. No subject seeking judgment. Just her and the weight of her crown. She stood and walked to the star display again. The empire spread before her, vast and beautiful and terrifyingly complex. Billions of lives depending on her decisions. She had always felt that weight, but now she understood she did not have to carry it alone. The human delegation had given her that gift, not their technology or their warriors. Just a simple truth that sharing burden was not weakness, that asking for help was courage, that standing together was the only way forward. Vashira removed her crown. It was heavy, ornate, a masterwork of ancient craftsmanship. It had been worn by 43 queens before her. Each had carried the weight of empire alone. She would be the first to admit she could not do it by herself. She placed the crown on her throne and looked at it for a long moment. Tomorrow she would wear it again. She would fulfill her duties with all the strength and wisdom she possessed, but she would do so differently. She would do so with friends beside her instead of subjects below her. The prophecy had been right. Humanity was here to challenge everything the Kale believed about power and authority and strength. But that challenge was not an attack. It was an invitation to become something better than they had been, to evolve beyond the limitations they had imposed on themselves, to learn that the strongest fortress was not walls but bonds. Vashira walked to her private chambers. She would rest. Tomorrow would bring the first steps toward a different future. There would be setbacks and resistance and moments of doubt. But she had made her choice. The Kale Imperium would stand beside humanity. They would learn from each other. And when the darkness came that the first Kale had warned about, they would face it together, not as conquerors and conquered, not as rulers and subjects, as friends, as allies, as species who had learned that survival meant more than strength. It meant connection. And in a universe vast and dark and full of unknown dangers, connection was the only light that never faded. The child's words echoed in her mind as she drifted towards sleep. Friends were important. They made everything better. Simple truth from someone too young to understand complexity. Or perhaps understanding complexity so well that she could distill it to its essence. Vashira slept without dreams, and when she woke, the universe was still there, still dangerous, still beautiful. But she was no longer facing it alone.